The first reading this morning comes from the Laughing Bird Psalm, number 139, verses 1 through 6 and 13 through 18. You have taken a good hard look at me, Lord, and you know exactly what makes me tick. You know when I've got my feet up and when I'm on the job. You can read my mind like an open book. You see where I am going and where I stop, and you know all about what I do and why. You know exactly what I'm going to say, Lord, even before I open my mouth. You are in front of me, behind me, beside me, and your hand on my shoulder at every turn. All this is more than I can get my head around. I pinch myself and struggle to take it in. It was you who put me together, every part of me. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I sing your praises, Lord, for the way that you have made me fills me with awe. Your creative works blow my mind, too wonderful for words. You could see me clearly before I was born. You watched me taking shape in the secret depths and laid out the intricacies of nerve and muscle. You kept your eye on me from conception to birth. My life lay before you like an open book, before I had even lived a day. Your thoughts are way beyond my grasp, God, and they add up to more than I can count. Deeper than the oceans, outnumbering the grains of sand. I give up trying, but you are with me just the same. The second scripture reading is from John 1, verses 43 through 51 from the New Revised Standard Version. The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him about whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus, son of Joseph from Nazareth." Then Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Philip said to him, "Come and see." When Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him, he said to him, "Here is truly an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." Nathanael asked him, "Where did you get to know me?" Jesus answered, "I saw you under the fig tree before Philip called you." Nathanael replied, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus answered, "Do you believe because I told you that I saw you under the fig tree? You will see greater things than these." And he said to him, "Very truly I tell you, you will see heaven opened up and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man."
When the boys were little, our family had season passes to Busch Gardens in Williamsburg, Virginia. And no, I'm not going to tell you stories about losing Connor. That was another story from another time in Busch Gardens. But to this day, we do believe that Busch Gardens is the best, hands down best amusement park in the country. And we stand by that. And I know that there's folks out there who'll say, "Well, clearly you haven't been to Disneyland because that's the happiest place on earth." In some people's opinion, okay. We did indeed go to Disneyland. It was spring break 2015. We went with friends. Things were going well. It was actually, we were happy to be with our friends more than anything else. So we were standing in line for the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, which is a great thing, right? And I think Cameron was the one who came up with this assessment. He said, you know, the production value here is pretty high, higher than Busch Gardens, but compared to Disneyland, well, Disneyland's pretty boring. Ooh. Well, we recently went back to Busch Gardens, I think not this last fall, but the fall before. And what we wanted to know was, is the boys still going to feel the same about Busch Gardens? You know, or was just the magic of the nostalgia of their childhood is what helped them come to this conclusion? So we went there and spent the whole day there. And sure enough, they said Busch Gardens still won. Because in their estimation, Disneyland is sort of like visiting a national monument. It's something you do to check off on your bucket list of things to do if you live in the United States. But the judgment stood firm. Disneyland was boring compared to Busch Gardens. And so some folks say, well, of course, if you go to the regular Disneyland park, if you don't have little kids who are into Minnie Mouse and Tinkerbell, of course you're not going to think it's very exciting. You need to go to the Disney California, what do you call it? California Adventure Park. That's the good thing. And you may be right, but you have to buy another ticket to get into that park. Busch Gardens, it's all in one package, in this huge package, in a much bigger park. You want roller coasters? Busch Gardens has some of the best roller coasters in the country. So y'all do a Google search sometimes. Do a Google search of lists of the best roller coasters in the United States. I challenge you to find any list that has a Disneyland or Disney World coaster with anything lower than a top 50 rating. Busch Gardens has several. Top 50, top 40, top 30, top 20. I haven't seen the top 10 yet for Busch Gardens specifically in Williamsburg, but it gives you an idea of what's going on there. So, okay, how about other things about the park? Is it all just roller coasters? Nope. Much more things to do. If you want music and entertainment, they've got it. You want beautiful scenery? Hey, the name is in. It's all in the name, Busch Gardens. No matter what time of year you're there, there is something beautiful blooming. And again, shows. Every hour on the hour, there is some kind of show going on in Busch Gardens, whether it's music or dancing or some animal show or something like that. Now, this is where I have to pause and be brutally honest with you. The shows are hit and miss at Busch Gardens. When they're good, they're great. When they're bad, they're awful. On one of our last trips to Busch Gardens before we moved here to California, Graham and I decided that we wanted to go see a magic show in the same arena that we saw a show called Vampires on Ice, which was every bit as cool as it sounds like it would be. And we were, at the time, following this magician named Criss Angel. Has anybody ever seen or heard of Criss Angel? He's like this rock star looking... Mind Freak. Yes, exactly, Mind Freak. So this was before the Mind Freak show, but he was still doing like TV specials. And this guy's this rock star looking magician, and he did some spectacular illusions. And so Graham and I walked into this show with some pretty high expectations. You know, we were thinking, what do you suppose this guy's going to make disappear? You know, is he going to make an animal disappear or a person or a car? And sadly, the magician at Busch Gardens was no Criss Angel. And the only thing that he made disappear were the members of his audience who walked out mid-show. Most of his tricks were variations on, I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 1,000, okay? Graham, at one point in the show, turned to me and said, "This isn't magic, he's just really good at math." But I do have to give the guy credit. For somebody who is lousy at math, like me, I I have to say that I was pretty impressed with his tricks. But I certainly wasn't going to join a fan club and, go to all of his shows if they were around town. He just wasn't all that. And so by now you're probably thinking, okay, Jesse, what in the world does this have to do with anything that Barbara just read in that scripture? Okay, well, that's a good question. Because when you look at this story from a certain point of view, it looks like Jesus convinced Nathanael to be one of his disciples by impressing him with an underwhelmingly simple magic trick. Okay? And trust me, I know how borderline heretical that sounds, but hear me out. Last week, we were looking at the Gospel of Luke's version of John the Baptist baptizing Jesus at the River Jordan. In Luke's Gospel, Jesus' baptism was the conclusion of Jesus' birth story before he went on to prepare for his public ministry. John's Gospel is much different than Luke's Gospel in this respect. First of all, in John, there is no birth story at all. John's Gospel starts out way before Jesus' human birth. John starts out with, in the beginning was the Word, and he talks about how the Word was the light of the world that shined in the darkness, and how the Word became flesh and dwelled among us. And then the gospel writer shifts immediately over to Jesus' baptism in the Jordan River by John the Baptizer, who, oddly enough, was not identified as Jesus' cousin like it was in Luke's gospel. Now, another difference between John's gospel and Luke's gospel is that there is nothing here about Jesus going out to the Sea of Galilee to invite Simon Peter to be his disciple. Matthew, Mark, Luke, those other three gospels has some version of that story. But not John. No, John, there is no "I will make you fishers of men" in this gospel. It was much simpler, especially Peter's call. One of John's disciples named Andrew. This was John's disciples, okay? One of John's disciples named Andrew, along with another guy whose name we don't even know, saw Jesus get baptized, and so then they switched over to become Jesus' disciples. And so then Andrew went home to tell his brother Simon. He said, "Hey, I think we found the Messiah here." And so Andrew brought Simon to meet Jesus. And Jesus said, "I'm going to call you Peter." And that's it. That is it for John's version of how Peter was called. So then the next day, Jesus went to Galilee and found Philip. And he said, "Follow me." And now we've got four disciples. We have Andrew. We have Simon, who is now called Pete. We've got Philip and a guy's name we don't even know yet. And, not very exciting, I know, but this is John's gospel. John thinks things like that are pedestrian. John wants us to think about the cosmic Christ who was in the beginning before anything was even created. That's what John is concerned with. He doesn't care about these little calling the disciples, except for when it comes to Nathanael. Nathanael doesn't show up that much at all in any of the other Gospels, but here in John's Gospel, we've got a very detailed description of his calling. And I've got to be honest, I wish that John would have given us more detailed versions of calling Peter like the other gospel writers. Because I like that version where Peter is out making a living as he has always made a living, casting his nets out into the sea, bringing in fish, meeting Jesus, and being so impressed with Jesus that he just drops everything that he is doing so that he can follow Jesus. In John, it's, "Hey, Simon, I'm going to call you Peter." And that's it. John is not always, well, let's put it this way. John is always the oddball of the four gospel writers. So it's not surprising that he's focused on someone else who the other three gospels barely mention. But here's the deal. The biggest problem with Nathanael is when you try to summarize the story. Here's how you summarize the story. Jesus meets Philip and says, "Follow me." Philip agrees. Philip goes to see his brother Nathanael and says, "Hey, we found the Messiah. He's from Nazareth." And Nathanael says, "Can anything good possibly come out of Nazareth?" And Philip says, "Well, come meet him." And so when Jesus saw Nathanael and Philip approaching, he said to Nathanael, "See, here comes an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." And then Nathanael acts surprised. "Oh my gosh, how is it that you know me?" And Jesus says, "Well, I saw you under a fig tree before Philip called you." Now keep in mind that Nathanael acted astonished after he said this. "You saw me under a fig tree? How did you know I was standing under a fig tree?" Now keep in mind, this is the Judean wilderness where every other tree is either a fig tree or an olive tree, okay? "Oh my word, you must be the Son of God, the King of Israel." I'm sorry, but honestly, I'm a lot more impressed with the math guy at Busch Gardens than I am with this, you know? Can you imagine how Nathanael might have reacted if Jesus said, "Pick a number between 1 and 500, you know? Or even better yet, if he pulled out a poker deck and said, "Pick a card, Nate, any card." Nathanael is what street musicians call an easy mark. A good hustler could have taken every shekel out of this guy's pocket playing 3-card Monte, right? There's a certain, I guess, psychology behind the art of illusion. A good illusionist often uses misdirection to convince their observers that they've discovered the solution to a particular trick. Because once an observer has been convinced that they know how the trick works, they are less likely to pay attention to any of the clues that points to how the trick is really done. They're distracted by looking for confirmation that their theory is the correct theory. It's like an illusionist who appears to make a coin disappear by passing it from one hand to the other. The observer assumes that it's in the other hand. But then when the illusionist opens that other hand to reveal that it's empty, the observer says, "Whoa, how'd that happen? That's magic." Now the reality is that the coin was palmed and was never left in the hand in the first place. Once we think we know what the solution is, it's really hard to convince us to notice any other alternatives or even consider any other alternatives. So, because John the Baptist was preparing the way for the Messiah by preaching and baptizing, people were convinced that all signs pointed to John being the Christ. John was the Messiah. They were so convinced that John was the one that they failed to recognize the one who was amongst them. Even after John corrected them and said, no, I am not the Messiah, there was still doubt that anything good could come out of Nazareth. And it wasn't until John told his 2 disciples that Jesus was the one that they were looking for that they finally made the decision to follow him. It makes sense that people were disillusioned with who Jesus was, because Jesus was unlike anything or anyone that they had ever encountered before, and he was definitely not their expectation of what a Messiah would be. Yet, like a good illusionist, Jesus wasn't upfront about who or what he was. All he did was invite them to come and see for themselves. These magician-like techniques, though, are not meant to be deceptive. They are meant to invite us into new possibilities and new understandings rather than distracting us by our own conclusions and our own assumptions. Now, some folks think they know who Jesus is. Some folks think they know who Christians are and what we're all about, right? They think that they've got us figured out because of what they've heard or seen on TV or what they've read in their newspaper or news feeds or any kind of social media. And they'll be like, oh yeah, I know all about these Christians. Man, they're all self-absorbed, egotistical, judgmental, ignorant, hypocritical. And you know what? No doubt some of us are. And the media loves to point their cameras at the worst of us because, like a circus, a goofy clown is often more interesting than the international dancers, right? But I think most of us who follow Jesus just want to do our best to shine a little light into the world, to follow Jesus as best we can, and encourage others to do likewise. And like John the Gospel writer, we do this because we believe that Jesus is the light of all people that shines in the darkness and that the darkness cannot overcome. If we expect people to understand this, or maybe even join us in following the way of Jesus, we need to be mindful of our actions and that our actions actually match our words. Georgianne posted something on social media on Facebook the other day that resounded with me. It's a quote by Cory Booker. It says, "Before you speak to me about your religion, first show it to me in how you treat other people. Before you tell me how much you love your God, show me in how much you love all God's children. Before you preach to me of your passion for your faith, teach me about it through your compassion for your neighbors. In the end, I'm not interested in what you have to tell or sell. I am interested in how you choose to live and give." As Jesus said to Nathanael, "Do you believe because I told you I saw you under the fig tree? You will see much greater things than these." So let us follow Jesus. Let us come and see so that we might follow the one who is the light of the world.